Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the rocky caves and open plains of the Ice Age, where early humans did not wield polished stone axes or wear sewn hides, but relied on flint flakes, wooden spears, and sheer grit. Forget the epic mammoth hunts and dramatic cave paintings you see in grand documentaries. The real story is about kindling sparks from stones, foraging bitter roots by the dim glow of dawn, and the gamble of every sunrise on finding enough calories to survive. So tonight we ask what cavemen actually did all day. What did it feel like to wake in a chilly rock shelter, senses straining for the crack of twigs and the promise of fire? Every era had its own challenge, so let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always incredible to see who's joining this journey into our deep past. Now dim the lights, pull your blanket close, and let's crawl into those ancient caves together. You wake to darkness so complete that your own breath seems loud in your ears. The cave mouth lies behind you, a yawning black shape, but you have no need to peer outside yet. Instead, you sit up on a bed of furs, muscles stiff from cold, and reach for last night's hearth. The embers rest among broken logs, dim orange glints like sleeping fireflies. You cup your hands around the coals and coax them gently with small puffs of breath. Each exhale is warm and soft against your chilled cheeks. You gather handfuls of dry moss and tinder you tucked in a hollow nearby. With steady fingers, you push flakes of dried lichen and grasses toward the glowing embers. A wisp of smoke curls upward before you breathe again, urging the coals back to life. You tap once on a flat rock to clear ash, then slide on a thin piece of driftwood. The sage smell of glowing wood fills your nostrils. You shift a larger log onto the coals and the flame flickers, rising in the dark like a cautious welcome. While the hearth warms you, you slide from your furs and stand. The cave floor is cool beneath your feet, stony and uneven. You move to the far wall where hides drape on wooden stakes. Last night you stretched these skins over bent saplings to shape a lean-to against the chill. Now you inspect each one, fingers tracing where frost has stiffened the leather. You loosen lacing tied in simple knots at the corners and slip the hide free. The air smells faintly of smoke and earth. You shake the hide, loosening the stiff patches, and lean it against the hearth to warm. You return to the fire and rake the embers apart with a slender branch. Sparks leap upward. You cup your palms to spread the heat over your face and hands. The chill recedes, but you remain mindful of the cold that crept in while you slept. Outside, the cave night still rules. No hint of dawn touches the sky, yet the rising heat whispers of light to come. You lift a shallow bowl of water from the central ledge. Last evening you filled it from the pool fed by the underground spring. Now you pour the water in a circle around the hearth and let it steam. The fragrant mist mingles with smoke, creating a soft haze that settles before the lean-to. You step closer to the hides and slip them back over the wooden frame. The skins flex and press into shape as the warmth seeps through. You smooth each wrinkle, firming the corners so they shed wind and keep out drafts. A broken spear shaft leans against the wall nearby. You pick it up and examine the binding of sinew at the haft. Last night you sharpened the flint tip, but the sinew loosened in the freezing air. You rewrap the sinew tight with practiced hands, feeling the grain of the wood warm where your fingers press. With the spear secure, you stand back and lean it in its place, ready for the day ahead. You crouch at the hearth again and feed it with thin slivers of bark and tinder. The flames burst higher and lick the stone roof, sending a soft golden glow through the cave. Shadows dance along the walls, revealing the rough outlines of tools and pottery left by those who have lived here before. You nod to their silent shapes and remind yourself that this fire is your own first act of survival today. You slide your hands into a hollowed stump and pull out scraps of dried hide. These you stretch and rub against a stone to clean off the last flecks of ash. Then you fold them neatly and place them near the hearth, where the heat will soften the leather so you can fashion thongs later. You imagine carrying bundles of these ready straps on the day's hunt, using them to tie flasks of water or secure freshly skinned game. A faint glow appears at the cave mouth. You rise and step forward, spear in hand, to see pale light creeping across the rocky ground. The world beyond the cave sheds its deepest shadows as the dawn arrives without fanfare. You pause, feeling that first thin kiss of light on your face, before you turn back to the hearth. Flames crackle and leap in greeting of the sun's approach. You scoop a handful of hot ash and scatter it under the lean-to. The fine powder will cling to the hides and help ward off moisture and insects. You pat it flat and brush away excess. Each gesture is precise, born of necessity and practice. You know that these careful tasks matter more than any grand display of skill. Fire and shelter spring from these simple acts. You gather a bundle of fresh twigs from a pile you collected before dusk. You tuck them near the hearth so they will be ready when you need to widen the flame to dry fish or meat. You move with quiet purpose, each step measured and deliberate. In this hour before full dawn, you feel the heartbeat of the cave, its cool walls pulsing with ancient stillness, and your fire pulsing back in return. At last, you settle by the hearth, draw your skin cloak around your shoulders, and watch the flames burn bright. The work of waking the cave is complete. Soon you will shoulder your spear and step into the chill morning to face the day's hunt. But for now, you sit in the warmth you created. The embers glow, a promise that each sunrise brings a chance to survive again. You pull your skin cloak tighter and rise from the warmth of the fire. The cave walls glow faintly orange as dawn light seeps in through the entrance. You bend to scoop water from the steaming pool and pour it into a shallow basin carved long ago into the stone. The surface ripples and fog drifts upward. You cup water in your hands and drink, tasting the cool mineral tang of the spring. It sharpens your senses and readies your mind for the day ahead. You wipe the basin with a scrap of hide and set it back on its ledge. Next, you move to a low shelf where small leather pouches hang from wooden pegs. Inside each pouch are fragments of flint and charcoal. You select a piece of flint chipped to a thin edge and trace the grooves with your fingertips. This tool will come with you on every expedition. You pack it into your belt pouch along with the pouch of tinder and the small bone needle you use to repair broken sinew bindings. A soft breeze carries the scent of damp earth and pine resin. You step to the cave mouth and peer out. The world is still half-shadowed. No bird yet sings. You gather a bundle of slender branches from the pile you stashed nearby before nightfall. Each branch fits comfortably in your hand and will serve as kindling should your fire falter. You tuck the bundle beside the hearth, then pause to survey the open ground ahead. Your next task is to forage for familiar greens and mushrooms. You slip outside and let the cave's threshold swallow you in pre-dawn gloom. Your feet sink into moss soft from last night's drizzle. You move toward a stand of alder and willow, known for holding ripe young shoots. Low ferns brush your ankles. You bend to strip a few fronds of fresh fiddlehead ferns. Their pale spiral tips promise nutrition and a mild bitter edge that you welcome after days without variety. You set the ferns in a woven basket by your side. You know which roots to seek. The tough note root grows near fallen logs. You probe the soil with a sharpened stick, find the swollen tuber, and gently pry it free. You repeat until the basket holds enough to satisfy your hunger if the hunt fails. Each root will need thorough cleaning, but in the rush before midday meal, you will boil them in the hearth's embers. You pause at a scattering of small stones arranged in a spiral. These mark a hidden water seep. You dig gently at the earth until water trickles through gravel into a hollow. You cup a handful and taste it. Mildly sweet from moss and soil, it carries few impurities. You fill your water skin and inspect its stitched hide. The leather feels supple, now warmed by last night's fire. You tighten the stopper woven from sinew and slip the bag over your shoulder. A sudden rustle draws your gaze toward a cluster of low bushes. In the dim light, you spot round white caps of young oyster mushrooms. You kneel and press a blade through the stem of each with care to leave the root intact so more can grow. You admire the smooth ivory flesh before brushing dirt away and placing the fungi atop your leafy fronds. These will add a welcome richness to the roots and herbs you'll boil once the sun climbs higher. You rise and turn back toward the cave. You pass the leather rack where pouches of roasted seeds rest. Yesterday you harvested bitter hazelnuts and crackled them in the embers. You open a pouch and swallow a handful. The crunch and oil balm your stomach against the cold air. More you store inside your bark flask. Some you leave by the hearth for evening when you return and need quick calories. Back in the cave, you feed your finds into a shallow clay pot set on 3 stones beside the hearth. You add a few feather-light splinters of pine to coax even heat through the vessel. You stir the mixture of mushrooms and sliced roots with a carved bone spatula and listen as crackles grow brisk. Steam rises in gentle spirals. You dip your fingers into the broth and taste. Earthy beneath bitter, you know that a spoonful of fungus will sharpen the flavor and guide your hunger through the morning. While the pot simmers, you retrieve your cloak and leggings. The stitched hides are stiff where frost caught the edges last night. You drape them near the hearth until the sun warms the stones. You kneel by the fire and trace the sinew seams with your fingertips. Some threads have frayed. You draw out your bone needle and thin strips of sinew soaked in animal fat. With precise punctures, you rebind each seam. The thread slides through hide as smoothly as oil on wood. You knot the ends and press them into the warm stone so they flatten before cooling. Motion by the cave mouth draws your attention. A young fox ventures from shadow. It pauses and sniffs the air. You sit perfectly still so the flicker of firelight won't betray your shape. The fox noses along a fallen branch, then slips back into the gloom. You feel a surge of triumph. Each morning you remind yourself that silent observation brings its own reward. You rise and place a few small twigs on the ember bed so that a secondary spark will blaze later, ensuring the fire stays alive until your return. Next, you turn to your spear. The haft warmed and bound, you now test its balance. You hold it in 2 hands and shift the weight forward then back. It feels light enough to wield, yet heavy enough to carry force. You draw the flint tip across a sharpening stone, aligning its razor edge with deliberate strokes. Tiny chips fly and glint as they fall on the stone's surface. You inspect the tip in the firelight to ensure it meets the wood at the right angle. Satisfied, you sheathe it in a leather sleeve you fashioned from deer hide. A distant bird call reaches your ears. The sun breaks over the horizon now. Light floods the cave and chases away the last corners of darkness. Pink and gold shimmer on the stone floor. You glance at your woven basket full of roots, mushrooms, and ferns. The clay pot simmers and sends savory steam into the air. You wipe your hands and press them to your face, tasting salt and smoke. You kneel to scoop a bowl of broth from the pot. The stew is hot enough to sear. If you rush, but gentle sips bring comfort. You sit on your fur bedding and wrap your cloak around your knees. You sip and chew, feeling warmth spread from belly to bones. The woven fibers of your bedding cradle you, and the fire crackles in steady rhythm. As you finish the last drop, you rise and push the pot toward the hearth's edge. You know you will refill it at dusk and again before dawn. For now, you slide your water skin to your belt and strap on your leggings and cloak. You test the fit of each strap and tug lightly to ensure nothing loosens in motion. You step outside with spear in hand and look over the terrain. The slope before you stretches toward a thicket where deer graze. Further on, a ridge holds tracks you scouted yesterday. You breathe in the crisp air and feel your senses sharpen. Your morning preparations have fortified body and mind. Each chore, from rekindling the fire to stitching hide, equips you for the day ahead. With a final glance at your cave, you tuck a small handful of hot coals into a clay jar sealed with hide. This ember jar will travel with you so that no matter how far you roam, you carry the means to call your home hearth alive again. You step into the open morning and let the world welcome you into its wild expanse. You step from the cave mouth and let your eyes adjust to the morning light. The world outside glitters with dew on mossy boulders and litter of oak leaves. You clutch your woven basket in one hand and your sharpened stick in the other. Your heart beats steady, each pulse reminding you that foraging may sustain your body, but danger may lurk beneath every fern. You move toward a gentle slope where the underbrush thins. There, the note root grows in tangled clusters beside a fallen log. You chart a path through tangled brambles, pausing when a twig snaps underfoot so you can listen for responses. Silence answers. You exhale and kneel on one knee. Your hand probes the damp soil, searching for the gnarled tuber hidden beneath a layer of leaf mold. You sense its shape against the tines of your stick and pry it free, loosening earth with gentle taps. The note root is bitter to taste, but satisfying when cooked. You bite the tip of a raw fragment. Its astringent taste curls at the back of your tongue. You nod to yourself and place it in the basket. Each root you gather will be cleaned, roasted, and boiled with wild herbs you carry in leather pouches. You know that the bitter edge will fade once heat draws out starch and toxins. Nearby, you spot a patch of bloodroot blossoms. Their milky sap once painted cave walls in the firelight. You know the sap can stain skin and irritate wounds, so you treat these runners with care. You cut a few stems and carry them unbruised to the basket's rim. Later, you will pull their roots, rinse them in river water, and rub them against bark to remove the outer layer. Then you will dry thin slices near the hearth, so you can chew them for antiseptic relief when cut or puncture weakens your skin. You rise and scan the brush. No movement stirs. The slope is quiet except for drips of dew and the rustle of leaves. You step carefully to a grove of wild raspberries. Your mouth waters at the sight of red jewels dangling like lanterns in the sun. You crouch and pluck a few, rolling them along your tongue. Their sweet acidity snaps your senses awake. You smile at their tang. More you store in a leaf-lined nest in the basket, so they will not bruise before you return home. Yet you remain cautious. You glance into the shadowed trees where a pair of ravens croak overhead. Their black feathers glint in dawn's light. You lift your stick and prod at tangled vines. The forest floor yields ripe blackberries, each orb heavier and darker. You sink them into your palm and feel their smooth flesh give way to juice. You drop each plump fruit beside the raspberries. The air smells of damp earth and pine resin. Even the scent of ripening berries holds notes of decay. You pause and inhale deeply, tasting bittersweet aroma that reminds you life and death share the same breath. You remind yourself that each bite holds peril if ingested incorrectly. You will cook with care, tasting small fragments before adding to the pot. As you gather, you spy tiny green shoots twisted around tree roots. These are fiddlehead greens. You grasp a pair between your fingers and snap them free. You inspect their spiral forms. They coil like delicate spring fetters. You press a fingertip onto the tip. It unfurls to a tender flange of green. You smile at their promise of nourishment. You tuck them among the berries. Your basket fills, but you must heed the shifting light. The sun climbs, and shadows shrink, exposing your presence more readily. You stand and lift your gaze to a distant ridge where the forest thickens into shadows. You know predators slink beyond that ridge. Saber-toothed cats and forest wolves both hunt in early morning light. Their eyes catch glints from the same dew you admire. You press a finger to your lips and settle into silence. You crouch by a hollow stump and hold your breath. Every sense sharpens. The rasp of leaves, the distant drip of water, and the faint tapping of your heart sound in your ears. After a moment, a deer steps onto a sunlit patch. It sniffs at fresh shoots and flickers its tail. You stand as still as a stone. You need not kill this creature today. You only seek roots and berries to tide you through another night. When the deer slips back into brush, you exhale and continue. Your path leads downhill where moss softens each step. Here the soil stays cool beneath tall hemlocks. You find stands of cattail roots choked with mud. You kneel and break the brittle stems until you spot the white knobs below. You grip a handful and twist one free, skeins of dark mud clinging to the length. You plop it into the basket. You know these hollow core roots will require thorough washing, but when boiled, they yield a mild sweetness that balances the bitterness of other tubers. A sudden rustle alerts you. You freeze as a forest boar emerges from brambles. Its bristled back bristles anew as it snorts for food. You hold your breath and raise your stick. The boar's small eyes roam the ground, oblivious to you. You relax, then kneel, hoping you do not startle it. You must tread carefully. Boar may charge if threatened. You settle until the boar roots once more among soil and leaves. Then, gentle as a shadow, you move past on tiptoe. You do not turn until its silhouette melts into gnarled trunks. Your breathing eases. You wipe sweat from your brow. The morning sun spreads warmth on your shoulders, but you remain keenly aware that the warmth can fade when clouds betray the weather. You move onward, speechless prayers to unseen spirits weaving between breaths. You spot juniper bushes heavy with dark bluish berries. These berries once traded as spice with distant tribes. You pluck a few and taste. A sharp pine flavor snaps on your tongue. You chew one slowly. The resinous heat fills your senses and settles in your chest. You spit out seeds. You store the crushed bits to flavor future stews and to help cleanse water of parasites. Your basket grows heavy, yet you push on to a clearing where wild garlic stands in clustered stalks. You pull a bulb free. Its bright white cloves glisten. You slice one with your flint and breathe in the garlicky sulfur. You smile. This pungent root will ward off small predators. You slip the bulb into your belt for easy reach and continue gathering ferns and plantain leaves. You press on to a thicket of wild currants. You pluck each ruby drop and roll it on your tongue. Sweet then tart, they burst with summer concentrated. You tally each in your mind until your basket overflows with roots, mushrooms, greens, and berries. You lean your stick against a low boulder and take a moment. Your breathing slows, your eyes rest, and you feel the weight of what you have gathered. The forest hums around you, birds flitting through canopy above, but you cannot rest long. You slip from the clearing and return toward the cave. At nearly every step, you glance beneath ferns and vines. A sudden snap of twig could signal a wolf's approach. You step lightly and keep your stick ready as a weapon if need be. Each sound seems amplified. A bird's trill, the distant drum of your heart, the rustle of leaves underfoot. You swallow deeply. You reach a mossy log, bridging a small creek. You crouch and probe the water with a finger. The stream runs clear, swift, cold. You filter a cup with a piece of cloth and drink deep. The water floods your lungs with sharp clarity. You fill your flask again, then rinse your basket's underside. You adjust the ferns so no mud clings where it might taint the berries. The forest grows denser now, the canopy blocking more sunlight. You spot a set of tracks, small cat paw prints pressed into soft mud. You lift your stick, ready to strike if claws flash. You press forward, leaning into roots, forcing your way past brambles until the clearing of your cave mouth appears. Relief washes through you. You step into the cave's shade and set your basket near the hearth. You exhale a breath you did not know you held. You wipe your face with a strip of hide. The bitter taste of roots lingers on your tongue but promises to vanish once cooked. You place each berry in a small pile. You sort raspberries and blackberries, discarding any that look bruised or infested. You store fiddleheads and greens separately. You rinse them with water from the flask until you remove the last speck of dirt. Carefully, you arrange the note roots in a low clay bowl. You splash water over them to rinse off mud. You pinch off any shoots showing signs of rot. You pat each root with your hide cloth until they shine. You heat a flat stone on the hearth and place each root on it to draw out moisture. The smell of damp earth and smoke drifts through the cave. You watch as steam curls from stone, drying the roots inch by inch. You dot a handful of berries into a small root hollow, then mash them to a pulp. You scoop the mash into a ceramic cup and press it into a basket of leaves, forming a makeshift lid. You leave this near ember heat until it dries into a tart that you can carry on travels. You wipe sticky juice from your fingers with a scrap of hide, then lick the last drop. The sweetness enlivens your senses and steadies your spirit. You fill a shallow bowl with water and drop juniper bits into the pool. You stir until the water turns pale blue. In this wash, you rinse the mushrooms you gathered earlier. You press each cap to remove grit. The juniper aroma drifts from the bowl, tanging the air with pine and rain. You smile, for this simple rinse will purge bitter tannins and make the mushrooms safe to cook. As the forest light shifts outside, you gather your spoils into bundles. You tie roots in husk bindings and fold berries into leaves. You hang each bundle from a wooden peg above the hearth to dry. Over the next 2 days, the sun's warmth seeping through the cave mouth will dehydrate them. When dried, they become lightweight and storable, ready to chew or to boil into soups when fresh foraging proves too dangerous. You pat your woven basket and tuck it into a corner. You reach for your stick and shake it, checking its balance and grip. You will take it tomorrow to hunt small game beyond the bend of the river. Tonight you will rest, feast on roots and greens, and stoke the hearth for warmth. Each morsel you gathered signifies your survival. Each dawn will bring new demands. Yet for now you lean into the cave's glow and taste contentment laced with the quiet knowledge that the forest always holds both abundance and peril. You settle beside the hearth, ready to brace yourself for night watches, the moans of winds, and the haunting calls of far-off predators. But for these few hours before darkness falls, you will savor the fruits of your labors and honor the wild ground that sustains you. You push aside a curtain of fern fronds and step into a sunlit glade where the air smells of warm earth and pine. The basket on your arm now holds morning's harvest, but you know that other treasures hide in deeper shadows beyond the ferns. You follow a narrow deer path that slopes gently down toward a marshy meadow. Mist rises from the damp ground in a silver haze that dapples the forest floor. You pause to steady your breathing and listen. A faint buzzing drifts on the air. Dragonflies skim the water's edge above floating lily pads. Kneeling at the edge of the marsh, you plunge one hand into the cool water and find a patch of soft, knobby roots beneath a mat of duckweed. Cattail roots thrive here, long and hollow where oxygen drips through the murk. You twist one free and bring it to the light. The creamy flesh gleams where mud clings to its creases. You slip it into your basket. This root will provide complementary starch to the bitter tubers you gathered earlier. You reach again into the water, stirring muddied ripples until more appear. Each root you collect feels heavy and promising, a hidden bounty beneath the reeds. You rise and step carefully across a narrow log, bridging a shallow channel. The sap of willow trees drips onto the log surface, making it slick under your feet. You lean into the willow's rough bark to steady yourself and continue along the water's edge. Here the marsh water sinks into dark peat, and you locate patches of medicinal marshmallow root. You pull one tuber free and check its firm flesh before placing it beside the cattails. When boiled, the marshmallow root will thicken broth and soothe sore throats. Your basket grows crowded, but you press on. A sudden rustle in the reeds makes you freeze. You turn slowly and see the tail of a heron rising above the tall grass. It lifts off with a flurry of wings and arcs into the sky. You watch its neck stretch as it glides away, then push through the edge of vegetation. Dappled light filters through older branches, and you step onto firm ground once again. A narrow game trail leads you uphill toward a stand of hazelnut bushes. You remember from earlier seasons how these trees yield sweet nuts that supply protein and fat. You part leafy branches to reveal clusters of green husk, still clinging to fragile shells. You gather handfuls of nut-laden stems. The husks feel spongy beneath your fingers. You place bundles into your basket. Later you will crack the shells between stones and collect the kernels. You inhale the scent of fresh nuts mingled with warm wood smoke drifting from your cave. You smile at the thought of sweet kernels roasted over embers. Beyond the hazel grove, you come upon a cluster of wild strawberries peeking from under broad leaves. Small and bright, they gleam like spilled rubies. You crouch and pick a few. Their sweetness melts in your mouth, and you savor the brief pleasure before adding more to your stash. Each tiny berry nourishes you in a way that no other food can. You pause to admire their color against dark soil, then continue upward. You scale a mossy incline where fallen oaks lie across the trail. Branches have rotted into the ground, yielding soil rich with nutrients. Here, morel mushrooms shyly emerge from damp hollows. You crouch and brush away detritus until you reveal their honeycomb caps. You place each one carefully in your basket, ensuring they do not crush. Morels will saute quickly over the hearth fire and lend a nutty depth to your stews. You note how the swampy ground and decaying wood create the perfect environment for these delicate fungi. A hawk's cry echoes overhead. You glance skyward and see a raptor circling against a brightening sky. Its keen eye scans the ground below, and you slip behind a thick sapling to vanish from sight. You will not become prey today. You continue your search for wild foods along a ridge where the earth slopes toward a sunken meadow. Here you find mountain sorrel sprouting in scant patches of sun. You know its tangy leaves yield vitamin C and help stave off scurvy in lean seasons. You pluck fistfuls and roll them between your fingers, relishing their sharp, lemony scent. You drop them into your basket. The bright green leaves will wilt soon if not dried, so you plan to spread them on a heated stone near the hearth later. Their sour flavor will brighten any broth and counterbalance heavy root meals. A whiff of pine resin guides you deeper into the woods. You spy tiny clusters of pine nuts nestled in shallow pits where squirrels have dug. You scoop them gently into your hand and taste one. Sweet oil coats your tongue. You gather more, aware that these small kernels could grant extra energy on long journeys. You tie a handful inside a piece of hide and place it at the top of your basket, where you can reach them when fatigue creeps in. The sun climbs higher and warmth seeps through your cloak. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow. The morning's labors have filled your basket to overflowing, yet you know the day is not done. You must press on to gather medicinal herbs on the north slope. You follow a narrow deer track that winds beneath beech and maple. Soon you reach a patch of goldenrod shimmering in the sun. The tall stalks wave gently in the breeze. You pluck sprigs of both leaves and blossoms. Goldenrod helps staunch bleeding and soothes inflammation. You know to dry these blooms beside the fire so you can brew them into healing infusions during leaner seasons. Next you find a tangle of purple coneflower, its petals fading but roots still potent. You dig around the base of one plant and find a bulbous root. You pry it free and examine its fibrous flesh. You cut a matchstick-sized fragment and taste its bitter warmth. You will chew small bits when colds strike. You slip the root into a pocket of woven grass to dry and carry with you on future hunts. A sudden gust rattles trees overhead and sends a shower of leaves falling around you. You hurry back toward the ridge you descended earlier, wanting to finish your work before storms gather. You know dark clouds sometimes gather without warning, turning trails into mud. You step more briskly, roots of older trees clutching at your feet. Branches overhead brush against your hair, and drop tiny pine cones at your feet. On a flat outcrop of stone, you kneel to inspect lichens, clinging to rough surfaces. You brush them aside to reveal a cluster of reindeer moss beneath. Its pale green tangle looks soft enough to cushion a child's head. You tug a handful free and place it into a pouch. When mixed with hot water, its bitter liquid can draw toxins from the skin. Later, you will carry the moss home and dry it near the warm crest of a flat rock. The midday sun beats down on your shoulders as you reach the crest of the ridge once more. From here, you see your cave nestled beneath a stand of pines. Smoke rises above the mouth like a signal of safety. You descend with careful steps, each one bringing you closer to the hearth you stoked at dawn. The forest floor slopes steeply. You navigate around deep hollows where water collects, avoiding sticky mud that could suck at your boots. As you approach a shallow valley, you spot a group of deer grazing beside a shallow spring. Their tawny coats glisten, and they raise heads to sense danger. You crouch low behind a fallen trunk. You know better than to frighten these animals now. Their presence signals that predators stay away. You press a handful of dried sorrel leaves to your nose and inhale deep. You steady your breathing as the deer return to nibbling. You rise and step quietly past, careful not to break twigs underfoot. You know that even a single snapped twig can echo like a gunshot in the hush. You climb the final slope and see your shelter's entrance. The fire still burns in a ring of stones. Smoke spirals into the air like a ghost rising from a still pond. You step into the hearth's glow and set your burden down. You unfasten straps and let the basket rest on the ground. You rub your palms together, feeling grit of moss and mud beneath your skin. Inside the cave, you spread your gather across a low stone table. Mushroom clusters sit beside heaped roots, berries, and nuts. You pause to admire this bounty, each item the result of hours of careful searching. You unlatch a small wooden door that hides the cave's winter stores. You transfer dry seeds and roots into your basket's empty hollows. You know these stores will sustain you when daylight fades and snows drift against the cave mouth. You light a small brazier of pine cones and moss beside your drying herbs. Grey smoke drifts upward, carrying scents of bitter roots and pine. You hang goldenrod and coneflower to dry on wooden racks near the brazier's heat. You spread morel mushrooms on a flat stone beside the embers, turning them so each side warms evenly. The pungent aroma of heated mushrooms drifts through the cave. You sort hazelnut shells from kernels and set aside each nut in a pile. You use a smooth stone to crack shells one by one. You admire the golden flesh inside. You set each kernel in a small bowl beside the hearth. The sweet nut oil pools on the cave floor, promising energy for later. You pick through the cattail roots, rinsing each in water still warm from the brazier's heat. You slice them into thin rounds and boil them in a clay pot until they soften. You strain the liquid into a shallow bowl. The starchy water tastes mildly sweet. You sip a small cup to test for bitterness. Satisfied, you pour it back into the pot and add thick slices of marshmallow root. The mixture bubbles and thickens. You set the pot on low heat and cover it with a lid of woven reeds. The aroma warms the cave, promising warmth against evening chill. Outside the cave, night begins to gather. Shadows lengthen across the forest floor, and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures drift toward you. You step back from the hearth and stretch aching muscles. The day's labors have tired you, but the sense of accomplishment steadies your soul. You glance at your gathered roots and berries. Each morsel holds the promise of survival through dark hours ahead. You clerk your thoughts. Tomorrow you will hunt, guided by the tracks of deer and perhaps fox. But for now you rest. You sink to the earthen floor and draw your cloak across your knees. You gaze at the flickering embers and let your breathing slow. In the silence of the cave, you hear the whisper of dried herbs shifting in the gentle breeze drawn through the entrance. You inhale the mingled scents, bitter roots, sweet berries, smoky resin. Tomorrow's tasks will demand vigilance once more, but tonight you will sleep on a bed of furs, bodies warmed by careful fires and nourished by the forest's gifts. In your dreams, you will drift through sunlit glades and misty marshes, tasting sweetness and silence. In that rest, you renew the courage to face dawn again and gather sustenance under watchful eyes. You crouch beside a flat slab of sandstone warmed by the morning sun. In your left hand, you hold a nodule of flint, its surface slick and dark like wet earth at twilight. Your right hand carries a hammerstone, round, river-smoothed, and heavy in your palm. Around you, shards of earlier attempts lie scattered, each a memory of a misstrike or a lesson learned. Today you will produce flakes sharp enough to slice meat or carve bone. You begin by inspecting the flint. Light catches a thin vein running through its core. That line will guide your strike. You place the flint on the sandstone anvil and lift the hammerstone. You position your arm at a precise angle, imagining how force will travel through the stone. As you bring the hammerstone down, you feel the vibrations surge through your body. A long flake peels away, landing at your feet like a feather in slow motion. The exposed edge glows translucent in the sun. You examine the newly formed blade edge. It is thin and even, jagged but controlled. You slip it into your small hide pouch for later use. Beside the anvil, you place a deer antler bat. Its tines point outward like a guiding hand. You take a new flint core and hold it in your left fist. With the rounded tip of the antler, you press against the core's edge. You rock the antler gently to test for the right spot. You strike once with the antler tip, and a slender flake peels off. You hold the flake to your lips and breathe in the cool edge. You know that with this sharpness, you could cut through sinew or carve a wooden handle. Carefully, you repeat, removing smaller flakes until the core takes on a pyramid shape. You feel that sufficient flakes now lie within your pouch to carve other tools later. Next, you turn to the task of scraping those flakes into usable blades. You place a fresh flake on a lower stone and hold it with a leather strap. With the bat, you apply measured force, striking along the flake's edge to form a bevel. The sparks of dust fly up as the flint's surface sheds tiny fragments. You rub both sides carefully until the edge feels razor sharp between your fingertips. You test the edge on a strip of hide, drawing the flake's length along the leather. A fine ribbon peels away, confirming the flake's cutting power. You set the flake aside in a lined basket. Having produced a handful of blades, you stand and stretch your legs. Your cloak brushes against dried grasses underfoot. The morning sun warms your back as you survey stands of young saplings nearby. Each sapling holds promise as a future spear shaft. You select a slender willow trunk that rises straight toward the sky. You kneel and trace its bark with your fingertips, checking for knots or warped grain. Satisfied, you draw your stone-edged flake along the trunk's length to remove loose bark. You carve several shallow grooves around the circumference to mark where grips will later rest. You lift a short length of deer tendon and tie one end around the sapling. Then you wrap the tendon tight around two stones and use friction to start rotating the trunk slowly like a primitive lathe. As it turns, you work a larger flint scraper down the length of the wood, shaving off its rough outer layer. Fine shavings flutter to the ground. Soon the surface reveals pale sapwood beneath. You dip your hand in water from your flask and rub the shaft to wash away sawdust. The wood feels smooth under your palm, ready for further care. You repeat this process on several trunks, selecting each for its straightness and even thickness. One slender branch you reserve as a javelin. Another thicker branch you intend for your primary spear. You set aside the smaller wedged rods for throwing at small game or as backup weapons. With your shafts clean and shaped, you gather resinous pine pitch from a nearby stump. You watch where heated resin oozed in old wounds of the tree. You break off a chunk and warm it by the hearth flame until it softens into a gooey mass. You knead the pitch between your fingers, feeling its sticky warmth. Then you apply a thin line along the tapered end of a shaft where you will attach the flint point. You press the flint into the warm resin and hold it steady until it begins to cool. The flint point sits flush against the wood, as though grown from its grain. You wrap rawhide strips around the joint, binding stone to wood in a spiral of sinew. You repeat this binding on each crafted spear. You sense each detail in the twisting sinew, ensuring there are no gaps where moisture could seep in and loosen the bond. The rawhide tightens as it dries, pulling each flint point into the wood's fibers. You step back and inspect your work. The spears lean in a cluster beside you, each one a testament to patient craftsmanship and keen understanding of both wood and stone. With crafting complete, you move toward a small clearing at the forest's edge. You carry a spear in your right hand and a knife in your belt. You scan the clearing for signs of movement. A fresh trail of deer tracks crosses the ground. You crouch low and follow them to a patch of tall grass. Through the sway of stalks, you catch a glimpse of a young deer's hindquarters. You raise your spear, keeping it level with the forest floor. The flare of white tail flickers. You take a breath and let it out slowly. The deer's broadside comes into full view. You step forward and time your thrust. Your hand tenses, and your arm extends in a single motion. The spear point finds its mark between the ribs. The deer leaps forward but staggers to a halt. You follow as it tries to run, angling your throw behind its shoulder. The spear catches its second mark. The animal collapses where it stands. You move quickly to finish the hunt. You pull a flint blade from your pouch and slice gently between the deer's ribs, cutting furls of sinew. You feel the sharp edge slice through organs and flesh with minimal effort. The quiet crunch of bone as you sever the tendons tugs at your senses. In this moment, the tool feels like an extension of yourself, each glance at the flint reminding you of its origin on the anvil stone in the cave. You hang the fresh carcass from an overhead branch using leather thongs. The meat drips warm blood onto leaves below. You return to the spears and choose the largest one. You draw it across your palm, feeling warmth of body heat that has soaked into the wood. You inspect the flint tip. It remains unchipped, the resin bond holding strong. You nod with silent pride. This spear earned your meal today. Next, you test your javelin on a small boar that grunts in a muddy wallow by the riverbank. You grip the javelin's slender shaft and aim for its thick flank. The boar senses movement and turns, but you release the weapon with careful timing. The javelin arcs cleanly through the air and thuds into the boar's shoulder. The animal squeals and charges. You lunge forward with your knife in hand, delivering a deep cut behind its ear. The boar shudders and collapses. You breathe in relief and awe. The javelin's lightweight shaft drags along the muddy ground as you approach. You press your knife to the wound and confirm the boar's death. Gathering small branches, you clear a fire pit on a group of stones near the fallen boar. You pile wood and kindling into a teepee shape and coax the heart of a coal from your tinder bundle. Flame washes over the wood and grows quickly. The heat rises in a welcoming wave. You place a flat stone above the pit to serve as a grill. You slice strips of boar meat and lay them upon the stone. The sizzling sound rings in your ears. You lean close, sensing each waft of warm air heavy with cooking flesh. You dip a thin strip of meat into a bowl of crushed bitter greens and crushed berries and taste. Each morsel carries smoky richness, tempered by a faint tang of sour fruit. As dusk settles, you inspect your remaining tools. Each flint blade shows signs of wear, tiny chips and nicks from bone and sinew. You decide to rework a flake that dulled near its center. You clear a spot on the cave's anvil and strike carefully to remove the damaged section. You fold the blade in half to test its balance. You fell satisfied. Its new edge slices leather straps and bone with ease. You turn your attention to your spears. The boar hunt confirmed that the wooden shafts held their straight lines. You run your fingers along each to feel for hidden cracks. You lean them against a warm hearth wall so that wood fibers can dry gently through the night. Tomorrow the fire's slow glow will reveal any flaws that only rest can show. For now you step back and rest by the embers. You reflect on the day's work. Each flake chipped and each sinew wrapped held life or death for you and your tribe. Flint, wood, and sinew joined in a living bond against tooth and claw. In the quiet hush of the cave, you honor these pieces of survival. You lower your head to the hearth and let the fire's heat chase away the cold. When you finally rest on your bed of furs, the flint tools lie within arm's reach, ready to resume your work at dawn. Your spears stand sentinel by the hearth, silent, lethal, and yet gentle offspring of patient hands. You close your eyes and hear echoes of the hammerstone strike. Each memory of stone on stone reminds you of the fragile line you walk between predator and prey, between life and the darkness beyond. In that darkness you rest tonight, secure in knowing your tools will rise with you to meet the light. You crouch beside the hearth as first light vanishes into full morning. Your crafted spear stands ready, with its flint point bound in sinew. Yet you know that every tool needs maintenance and constant care. Before you leave to test the weapons further, you decide to fashion a set of smaller implements that will aid you in everyday tasks and in future hunts. Your first task is to refine a cluster of flakes you napped yesterday. Each flake holds potential as a small knife or as an awl to punch holes in leather. You retrieve a leaf of birch bark and spread it across a flat stone. On top, you arrange each flake so that the edge faces upward. You tap it gently with the rounded tip of your deer antler at just the right angle. Shards of flint peel away until each fragment attains a sharp and even edge. You hold one between your thumb and forefinger and run it across a strip of hide. It slices through effortlessly and leaves a clean opening. You tuck that flake into your belt pouch for immediate use. Next, you gather slender branches of hazel to craft handles. You inspect each branch for straightness and a diameter that fits comfortably in your fist. When you find a suitable piece, you shave away the bark with a broad flake until the wood feels smooth under your fingers. You rub it with water to remove any loose fibers. Then you hold the blade against the handle and mark where the haft will rest. You carve a shallow notch by striking gently with a smaller flake. With careful motions, you form a small socket that cradles the flint blade. When the blade fits snugly, you bind it to the handle with thin strips of rawhide. You wrap the binding tightly once, twice, and thrice until the blade will not shift under pressure. You apply a dab of pine resin at the junction to seal gaps and prevent water from loosening the sinew. You slide the completed knife into a loop of hide tied to your belt. Its new owner will be you, and it will carve meat or trim hides with equal skill. Beside you lie fragments of bone from the boar you harvested earlier. You reach for a long rib segment and begin to shave it with a scraper flake. Your goal is to fashion an awl strong enough to punch through layers of hide when you stitch new bindings or repair torn furs. You carve the rib into a graceful taper, smoothing the surface until it gleams in the firelight. At its base, you leave a small knob so that you can grip it firmly. When you test the point on a scrap of deer hide, it slides through with ease. You wrap a bit of sinew around the handle to give padded support where your fingers press. This bone awl becomes a trusted companion for any leatherwork you face. Satisfied, you rise and pick up the spear that rests against the cave wall. Today you must test its balance for throwing and thrusting alike. You step outside to a clearing just beyond the cave mouth. The ground here is trimmed short by grazing deer and foraging boar. You kneel and draw a circle in the dirt to mark your throwing area. Then you set a wooden target at a measured distance. It stands as a reminder of the deer flank you struck yesterday. You straighten and hold the spear at your side. You place your feet shoulder width apart. You draw back the spear so that the butt rests against your hip. You lean into your throw with a single fluid motion. The spear sails through the air, spinning along its axis, and strikes the target with a solid crunch. You hear flint meet wood and yet feel no bitter rebound in your hand. You know the shaft's balance is true, and that your binding holds firm. You retrieve the spear and repeat the throw twice more. Each time it finds its mark, you grin at your growing confidence. This weapon will serve you well in days when game stays farther back in thick underbrush or when smaller boar lurk in ambush. Your aim must remain true, because in that hour, every second counts. After testing the primary spear, you cast a glance at a cluster of birch logs a short distance away. You rip a spear shaft from its resting place and step back to prepare for a thrusting practice. You grasp the shaft's midsection and assume a low stance, as if facing a charging boar. You thrust forward through the air and plunge the point into the soft wood of a log. The strike feels powerful. You withdraw the spear and examine the flint tip for damage. A tiny chip glimmers at its edge. You lift the tool to eye level and inspect it in the dawn light. The edge remains sharp enough, but you mark that flake in need of touch-up once you return to the cave's hearth. With one final thrust, you finish your test. You drag the spear across the ground and lean it against a rock. You gather smaller spear shafts and test each in turn. One gives a hollow echo when struck against carved bark, indicating an internal crack. You set that shaft aside for fire kindling later. You choose a different piece and carve away a limb stub with a flake until the shaft feels seamless under your hand. By midday, you return to the cave. Your sweat dries on your skin as you enter through the curtain of ferns. Inside the hearth's glow, you place the chipped flint flake on a flat stone and tap gently to restore a sharp edge. You press the tip to your tongue to taste for smoothness. You nod and tuck the blade into a leather pouch. Tomorrow you will craft another binding for that spear using fresh sinew and extra resin. Your next task is to fashion a small hand axe. You dig in the basket and select a thick chunk of flint. You choose a stout handle of willow. You shape the flint into a broad wedge by striking each side with your hammerstone until the flake's heel resembles a broad triangle. You hold the triangle against the tip of the willow branch and wrap it in rawhide. You pull the sinew tight, twisting it so that pressure holds the flint at a downward angle suitable for chopping wood or splitting marrow bones. You test the binding by chopping at a small log. The axe bites into the grain and removes a chip of wood. You repeat until the shape and binding feel solid. Next, you carve a wooden shield to test your knife. You draw a rough circle in the soft wood of an alder plank. With your new knife, you trace its outline, gradually deepening the cut until the slab loosens from its backing. You split it free and drop it on the ground with a hollow thud. You use the knife to shave away excess wood until the shield stands at a size you can hold comfortably. You aim to strengthen it by gluing bark strips to the front, which you pour with a thin layer of pine pitch for waterproofing. You leave the shield to dry near the embers until tomorrow. Hungry from your labors, you break a few strips of roasted boar meat from the hide rack and warm them over the fire. You cut roots into thin slices and add them to warm water in a clay pot. You wait for the mixture to soften. You taste a piece of root. Its starch has turned sweet and fills your mouth. You chew slowly and marvel at how that bitter tuber became a staple when no fresh game appears. You swallow and feel your strength return. You sit cross-legged near the hearth and tend the drying herbs. You pick the first batch of goldenrod, combing away stray leaves until only blossoms remain. You stack them on a wooden rack where the fire's gentle warmth will draw out moisture without overheating them. You lay morel mushrooms on a flat stone so they dry quickly before spoilage. You set aside bundles of fresh garlic to braid into a string for use when disease threatens. As dusk falls, you pack away your spears, knives, and axes. You weave a simple strap of hide to carry the smaller tools together. You loop the strap over a ceiling beam so each tool hangs in the fire's glow. You step back and survey your tools as they gleam with candlelight. Each stands ready to serve the coming days when hunt or forge demands them. You reach for the shelter door and draw it closed to block late evening chill. Lying on your fur bedding, you think of tomorrow's tasks. You will accompany the hunters to a distant grove where elk graze during twilight. You will need your primary spear for defense. Yet you also know that other tools will prove vital. Your bone awl to repair bindings, your hand axe to chop kindling for that next hearth, and your small knife to carve both wood and animal sinew into new shapes. You close your eyes and feel each tool rest like a limb of your body. You drift into sleep aware that survival is rooted in these simple instruments of stone and wood, shaped by your hands and guided by your instincts. You step out of the cave just as dawn's first rays spill through the trees. The air holds a crisp promise. You shoulder your spear and tighten the strap that cradles your knife and bone awl. Your breath settles into a calm rhythm, each exhalation a silent vow to move without sound. You bend low and scan the ground for tracks. The soil still clings to hoof prints from yesterday's deer herd. You kneel and brush away a few damp leaves with your fingertips. You trace the impression, two rounded halves trailing to a cloven indent. You rise and follow the trail, slipping between ferns while the forest stirs to life. Your quarry knows these woods better than you ever will, yet you carry the advantage of stillness. You close your eyes and listen. A twig snaps somewhere ahead. You freeze, muscles coiled like springs. The call of a distant woodpecker echoes hollow, and your heartbeat slows. You lift your right foot and place it exactly where your left stood, careful to avoid loose debris. You move again, pressing your blade tip into soft earth to test for dry leaves. When each step meets moss or damp soil, you advance. Sunlight filters through the canopy in shifting patterns. Shadows dance across exposed roots as the wind stirs high leaves. You know that deer rarely linger in direct sunlight. They seek the comfort of cool shade. You edge along a low ridge where oak trees cluster. The scrubby undergrowth parts beneath your careful hand. There, beyond a tangle of brambles, you catch sight of a doe, her flank broad, her tail white band raised in caution. She stands near a fallen log, nose low. You freeze in mid-stride, heart hammer stilling. Her eyes flick toward you. You remain stocked in place until she lowers her head to nibble new shoots. You drop to one knee and grip the spear's shaft. You shift weight so your knee rests on soft earth. You tighten your gaze on the doe's chest, the rise and fall marking her breathing. With silent intent, you press forward, inch by inch. Each motion feels like underwater movement, muffled and deliberate. Leaves release their dew onto your skin. Your spear's tip glints as you draw level with her flank. The doe's ears flick. She dips her head again. You coil your fingers around the spear. You step forward and brace your body. Time slows. You raise the spear into position. The doe steps backward, hooves cracking twigs. You lunge. Bronze muscles knotted along your arms drive the spear forward. In a single fluid motion, steel meets flesh. The flint point strikes rib beneath fur, and you feel the shaft tremble before you twist to withdraw. The doe crumples where she stands, stepping once more before collapse. You exhale with relief. You approach gingerly, cautious that nothing else lurks close by. You glance at the spear's flint tip. It remains sharp, though slick with blood. You kneel beside the animal and lay a hand on its flank. It quivers once, then stills. You breathe deeply and brush a wisp of hair from its side. The heart stills. You whisper gratitude to the spirits that guide hunters. You pull a flake from your belt and sever the tendon-binding spear to shaft. You tip the blade toward the doe's throat. The flint slides through sinew with a whisper. Blood swells at your feet, dark and fertile. You close the doe's eyes and press your knife between its ribs, letting steel and sunwater share their blessing. The doe yields to stillness. You raise your head and survey the woods, alert for any sign of boar or wolf, satisfied that no predator presses here yet. You kneel again, You close your fingers around a tuft of fur at the doe's throat. You press the blade's edge to skin and begin your first cut. The hide parts softly, and the sharp edge reveals linings of muscle and fat. You slice carefully, severing hide along the midline. You peel back the flaps of skin until you expose the warm flesh beneath. Your knife glides through tissues. You break rib bones with a precise tap of a sharpened flake until you can lift the heart free. You tuck the heart into a small pouch to roast later by fire. You reach deeper, carving tender chunks of meat for your hunting party's meal. Each morsel you place into your basket carries the promise of nourishment for many. You salvage organs that will flavor stews. You divide the meat into even piles. You bury bones where scavengers can find them and close the wound in earth, offering what remains to forest creatures. You rise, spear in hand, and lift the doe's body. Alone you heft her weight with a grunt. You drag her carcass toward a nearby clearing where your companions wait. Each step leaves footprints in dew-laced grass. Mist swirls at your ankles. You settle the doe at the base of a large pine and lift your spear in silent salute. Minutes pass before your companions appear through the clearing's edge. They move with quiet deference, eyes bright with respect. A young hunter steps forward and kneels. You draw your spear back and place the shaft across the doe's flank. He reaches beneath the animal and finds a crease between muscle and bone. He slices, then traces your earlier incisions, replicating each cut. The doe's warm insides reveal themselves to his blade. He yields each piece carefully. Your group circles around the plunder. One places the doe's head on a flat stone. You pick up the heart and offer its warmth around the circle. Each hunter presses forward and grasps a portion: hindquarter, shoulder, flank. The smell of fresh blood and warm fur fills your nostrils. You meet each friend's eye. No words are needed. Permission exchanged. Through glances carves a bond deeper than speech. One kneels to light a fire. You draw a piece of bark from your pouch and ignite it with flint and hammerstone. Soon smoke drifts among standing stones. Green oak and pine kindle in a spiral shape. You lay pieces of tender meat on hot embers, shifting each as it sizzles. The air stings with roasting fat and coals flare blue in the morning chill. You taste the first ember smoke on your lips and feel anticipation coil through your spine. While the meat cooks, you invite each hunter to share signs from the hunt. The youngest speaks first. She traced tracks across a flooded riverbed and found footprints of sowing her herd the evening before. She speaks of ground mired in mud, of prints weighted by hooves. She describes tracks that turned toward you when mist settled before daybreak. You nod in silent pride, for her trust in footprints guided you to this kill. Another speaks of rasping breath he heard moments after you struck. He was hidden in a tangle of thorn brush, and the spike of the doe's tail signaled your success. Each shares their role: who distracted a grazing boar earlier, who cleared fallen branches to grant you a clear path. You hear how your choice of approach saved each from detection. No one praises a single hunter for credit. Instead, you speak of unity. Your friendships forged on shared hunts outshine any single stroke of the spear. News of the kill reaches the cave. From within its mouth, elders appear carrying fallen branches of pine. They set logs in a rough circle around the clearing. They stack stones for seating. They lower woven mats of furs onto each stone. One elder steps forward and lifts the doe's head in a ritual salutation. He whispers a prayer of thanks to forest spirits for their gift. The other elders brush cedar smoke toward the meat, chasing away insects and granting blessing to each piece. You feel a tremor of reverence run through your bones. As the bronze sun climbs, the meat is ready. Fresh strips of doe flank sizzle and curl. You take the first piece, raw and hot, and let it touch your tongue. The flavor bursts smoky, meaty, and warm. You feel strength anchor in your chest. You chew slowly, each bite an echo of the hunt's tension and the forest's bounty. Around the fire, each member takes torn meat. You pass the bone awl to one who uses it to tease marrow from the bones. You mix roasted berries you gathered yesterday into chunks of fatty roe, tasting sweet meat with tart wood fruit. A storyteller among your group begins a tale of an ancient season when elk roamed closer to these hills. He speaks of how ancestors tracked herds across rivers in spring, guided by rising mist. You hear each word as though it breathes new life into memory. That story will join your own, to be passed down by torchlight to those yet unborn. Between bites, you taste broth steeped with bitter greens and dried roots. You dip the flint-crafted spoon you carved into the bubbling cauldron, feeling the warmth seep into your palms. You lift the vessel and cradle its rim against your lips. Each swallow tastes of salt and herb and promises to stave off autumn chills. You pass the cauldron to the next hunter and watch as he tilts it in thanks. Your group falls into conversation about the day's work and tomorrow's plans. Some will return to sharpen blades that dulled against rib bones. Others will prepare snares to capture small game for skins and sinew. The forest hums around you. A pair of ravens calls overhead and the wind stirs high branches. You close your eyes and soak in the moment. The warmth of shared fire, the taste of fresh meat, and the silent oath that binds you all. As feast draws to a close, one hunter retrieves a small pouch of pine resin. She smears it over the wooden handles of your axes and knives, sealing the seams where wood meets tool. The resin hardens under the fire's heat. You rub your fingers over each handle. The bond holds strong. Tomorrow you will fell trees and carve new implements without worry that tools will fail. The sun now stands high enough to chase shadows from the clearing's center. You rise and stretch. Your muscles feel full of energy from the hunted deer's meat. You take one last look at the carcass stowed to be carried home in pieces. You remember how you pressed your spear through sinew and bone at dawn. You carry that memory as though it were a second heartbeat. Older hunters step forward with flint scrapers to remove remaining scraps of hide. They pile the hide near the hearth's edge so it can smoke dry for cloak or mat. Others stack bones near the fire until each crack will free marrow for winter stores. You lift the final piece of meat from hot embers and bite. The juice runs down your chin. You smear the oily crumbs on your fingertips and press them to your tongue. Each taste celebrates today's triumph. A silent stalk, a precise strike, and a feast shared beneath an open sky. You lift your spear in salute to the forest and the hunting spirits. You feel gratitude for the boundless patience required to track prey unseen, for the crafting of tools that made each meal possible, and for the bonds that hold your tribe together in twilight and dawn alike. And as you step back toward the cave, you carry the warmth of the fire still glowing in your chest, armed with muscle memory and reverence for each silent step taken beneath dappled light. One day this first kill will join older legends in the annals of your people. But tonight you rest beneath the canopy, letting each breath settle you against tomorrow's call to hunt once more. You rise from the stone seat as the last scraps of meat disappear into cupped palms and calloused fingers. The embers glow red beneath coals that once burned hottest. You press your palms together to warm them and look across the clearing at the others. Beams of late morning sun slant through gaps in the canopy to light flecks of dust in the air. You feel the warmth on your skin and the promise of more work ahead. Some hunters have already begun dividing the remaining meat into portions for drying and smoking. You join them at the edge of the fire. One lifts a split log and balances it on two stones to form a makeshift rack. He lays strips of flesh across it, ensuring each piece has space for air and smoke to circulate. You pick a bundle of green boughs from nearby hemlock and lay them beneath and above the meat. Each layer of branches, still damp with resin, will create aromatic smoke when the fire rekindles. When the rack is ready, you move a handful of coals beneath it, and feed them with dry twigs. Smoke curls up through the meat like mist rising from a river at dawn. Nearby, another hunter uses a flint chopper to shave fat deposits from bones. The fat will render into tallow for lamps once you return to the cave. Tallow provides light for grim work by lamplight on chill nights. With each slice, you feel the weight of generations who learned these tasks before you. You press a flake into the bone's marrow cavity to pry out the rich center. The marrow drips down your forearm. You brush it into a clay bowl set at your feet. This will be scooped into skins and buried under stones until the tallow separates from impurities. A third hunter, a woman with keen eyes, stretches hides of younger deer on a concave log. She uses bone awls to punch holes along the edges so that leather strips can bind the hide tight. As the hide dries, it will form a sturdy cloak or a floor mat to insulate cold earth. You kneel beside her and hold the hide taut while she works needles through softened sinew. Each hole appears at measured intervals. She ties each stitch and pulls it tight, smoothing the hide to wrinkle out creases. You feel the smoothness of the leather beneath your palm and remember how you trailed this deer through a thicket in pre-dawn mist. Now its hide shelters you from wind and rain. Above the fire, birds circle in the sky. You look up to watch crows wheeling and croaking. Their keen eyes spot even the smallest flicker of movement. You remind yourself to keep all tasks slow and measured. A sudden clatter sends one crow flying off. You feel sweat run down your back as the sun crosses directly overhead. You reach for the last roast of meat, still sizzling. You pull it free from the coals with a pair of sharpened tongs carved from hardwood. You draw a flake from your belt and slice the meat into bite-sized pieces. You chew slowly, letting warm juices slide across your tongue. The flavor is raw and smoky. You swallow and savor the memory of the hunt that brought this gift. An elder moves toward you, carrying a clay vessel of bitter tea steeped from crushed roots. He pours a thick liquid into a shallow bowl and hands it to you. The aroma is earthy and pungent. You stir the brew with a bone spoon to settle loose bark and leaves. Then you lift the bowl to your lips and sip. Heat spreads into your core. The bitter taste lingers, reminding you how each flavor, even harsh ones, signals survival. When the bowl is empty, you exhale and feel the warmth steady nerves still buzzing from dawn's work. Your attention shifts to a hush that has fallen over the clearing. A traveler arrives from a distant ridge, tracing a narrow path through bracken and pine needles. He carries hides and tools across his back, and each step brings fresh supplies of flint and resin. He approaches with careful reverence, feet stirring only dead leaves. You step aside so he can pass. He lays his gifts before the grateful circle, a new flake of rare obsidian, glossy black and razor sharp, handfuls of dried berries from slopes you have not yet seen, and rope made from plucked bast fiber, twisted until each strand binds tight with the next. The hunters gather to accept these gifts. You join them, offering a portion of smoked meat in return. He lifts the meat and nods, feeling its weight. He knows these exchanges build community and strengthen bonds beyond a single kill. You smile to see his eyes light in gratitude as he presses the meat to his heart. Now you speak of tomorrow's plan. You will hunt boar near the marsh, where late-season rains have driven them to firmer ground. Boar hides will become thick leather for shields. Their tusks will fashion tools to carve bone. The group nods agreement. You know that even a single boar can supply food for weeks. But first, you must prepare. You rise and approach the log rack. The thin strips of meat are limp from time spent near the heat. You test one with a dry finger. It springs back with slight tension, showing it is nearly dry. You move it higher on the rack to catch more smoke as coals burn. You fetch more hemlock boughs and stash them beneath and above each layer. Soon the fire will consume most of the wood but leave behind aromatic smoke. You know that this process will preserve meat for days to come. A young hunter touches your shoulder and points to his flint knife. A tiny nick mars its edge. You take the knife and inspect in sunlight. You lift it to the sky, noting how light penetrates the flake to reveal minute cracks. You lay it against a sharpening stone warmed by the fire. You press along its surface with careful strokes, feeling each section of edge sharpen beneath your fingertips. Once you deem it fit, you hand it back. He tests the edge on a strip of hide. A fine ribbon curls away. He grins and wraps the knife around his belt in a casing of stitched hide. Now you turn to the hides drying on the rack. You observe how the sun and smoke have drawn moisture from their fibers. You pull each clothesline taut and adjust hides so they catch both wind and sun. One large hide drapes across a low branch, forming a backdrop for tomorrow's midday meal. You know that under this hide the sun will bake it taut and resilient. You step to a cluster of empty clay vessels stacked near a boulder. You choose the smoothest one and carry it to the spring where water gushes from a mossy stone. You fill it halfway and carry it back to the hearth. You heat water over a low flame and place a handful of bitter greens. Into the pot, you stir until leaves soften. Each hunter gathers around and dips a morsel of forage into the brew. You swallow a spoonful. Heat races through you as the bitter meets the salt of sweat. This simple broth will ward off hunger until the next hunt. With midday approaching, you imagine wolves snooping at the forest's edge, and no time is precious. A hunter whistles softly, an agreed signal that meat is cooked and hides are drying. You lead the way to a shallow incline where logs act as benches. You sit and share the warming broth. Others draw flakes to shave slices of dried meat, dipping each in the bitter brew. The forest hush settles over all, save for the crackle of embers and the sigh of hardly moving air. You lean back and close your eyes, letting warmth settle in your chest. After a pause, you rise and motion to those drying hides. You take a flint awl and push the tip through a reinforced seam, ensuring no tear threatens the integrity of hard-earned leather. You tighten each stitch and pull rawhide until fibers compress. The sun's heat presses out shadows from the hide. You pat it to test for dryness. Satisfied, you retrieve the handle of an axe. The haft's end shows signs of wear. You carve a shallow groove near the handle's base to fit your palm more securely. You feel the sheen of coals as you warm the handle by embers. The wood's natural oils rise to the surface and polish under your palm. Your eyes follow the ridge beyond the clearing. You recall how boar have been sighted near the marsh at sundown. You will depart near dusk to lie in wait. Meanwhile, you must ready traps and snares. You gather lengths of twisted rope made from bent willow bark. You follow the older hunter to a shallow, concealed rut where boar tracks press into soft earth. You place a snare loop high enough that a boar's leg will catch when it steps forward. The hunter urges you to tie the knot tight enough to hold weight, but loose enough to tighten underpull. You pull firm and test. The loop slides closed and holds against simulated pressure. You rinse your palms in cool water and move to set a second snare. This one you bury under a thin layer of leaves. You arrange fresh roots nearby to lure the boar's nose. Each snare you build could bring a second boar within days. By late afternoon, the sun wanes and forest shadows lengthen. You return to the clearing. The fire has died to embers. You prod them and pile on dry twigs. Sparks climb to flame again. You lay fresh strips of hide across the still glimmering coals. The aroma of singed fur and smoke drifts into your nose. These strips will feed the fire and produce smoke for tonight's boar hide curing. You test the air for wolf calls. None come. Yet you know they lurk beyond hearing. Behind you, hunters gather flint and axes. They sharpen each with care. A woman holds a stout oak pail. She crushes nuts with a flat rock to extract oil. Oil will feed the fire and feed lamps when night blankets the camp. You gather husks and grain until your basket brims. You sling it over your shoulder. Dusk returns with a cool breeze. You and a small group slip toward the marsh's edge. Each carries torch and snare. The sky dims to a purple haze. Crickets trill in waves. The trees stand sentinel in half light. You move forward, careful not to disturb fallen logs or rustle reeds. The marsh lies before you, its surface broken by ripples where water meets mud. You kneel behind a mat of reeds. You wait. Night descends. The first frog croaks from deep water. A wing sound echoes overhead. You steady your spear. Nothing moves. Then a brush of movement catches your eye-dark shape, spiraling from water's edge. A boar steps forward, its tusks gleaming in torchlight. It roots at the ground for tubers. You release the torch holder and draw the spear. Your thrust meets a solid mass. The boar squeals and charges forward. You brace your feet and twist. The flint point bites between ribs. The boar tumbles and thrashes. You hear sinew snap under pressure. Your allies move in with knives drawn. They avoid tusks and jaws. In a single motion, they slice at the boar's neck. The beast keels over. You stand in hush. The boar's large frame stirs the reeds like wind. You approach with care. You lay a flint blade to its jugular and whisper, "Thanks for life." The boar's breath slides from hot body to night air. You return, spear to belt, and signal to allies. By the fire you gut the boar, remove hide and head. Hunters hang hide from overhead branches. You gather thick outer hairs to fashion rope. You wrap the carcass in grasses to keep flies away until you can return in daylight to butcher. Tonight, darkness hides you. You sit beside embers that now burn white. You share root stew warmed by tallow. Each hunter holds a piece of boar fat melted into broth. You feel strength course through bones. You reflect on how forest nourishes you, raw and vital. Each life taken will feed many in coming weeks. Night deepens. Crickets fade. Owls hurl hoots into darkness. You lean back, warmed by fire. Tomorrow you will drag the boar to the cave, then cut meat for stored rations. Tonight you will sleep under a canopy quilted with stars, wrapped in a cloak made of deer hide. You feel unity with earth and fire, blade and spear. In this rhythm of hunt, share, and rest, you learn what it truly means to survive. You awaken to a gust that rattles the cave's entrance like a drum beaten by unseen hands. Your furs lie tangled around you in a damp heap, and the air holds the smell of last night's embers mixed with water seeping through moss on the roof. You push yourself upright, brushing flecks of ash from your cloak, and move to the hearth. The flames sputter low, licking at half a coal that clings to life like a lone ember beneath a rainburst. You cup your hands around the dying fire, willing it to rouse, but the wind roars through the cave mouth, scattering sparks like frightened moths. You crouch low and rake the embers together with a broken stick. Tiny flames flicker where the coals glow, but the wind hisses through the gaps in the rock. You drag a handful of dried moss from a hollow near the cave's edge and push it gently into the hot center. A cloud of smoke rises in protest, and you cradle the cluster of fibers between cupped palms, exhaling steady breaths. Each inhale fills your lungs with damp smoke that coats your throat, but you do not relent. Spindly flames sprout from the moss, and you feed the fragile hearth with splinters of driftwood you gathered yesterday. The tinder glows, the flames climb, and soon a steady blaze pushes back the damp chill. You smile at the victory. Fire is life in these wind-raked caverns. As long as flame dances in the darkness, each corner of the cave will remain your sanctuary. You fan the small fire with a dry piece of bark, coaxing it upward. Sparks rise to press against the cave roof until they sputter into oblivion. The blaze settles into a low roar that banishes early morning gloom. You add larger logs of pine to the hearth. The flame surges and sends tendrils of heat curling toward your face. The cave rattles as wind presses against the entrance. You lean close to the flame, drawing warmth into every bone. While the fire strengthens, you turn to securing shelter overhead. Last night you noticed water seeping through cracks in the cave's rocky ceiling. You step around damp patches to where ferns and brush have been gathered against the dripping stone. You reach for a stout branch propped against an outcropping. It feels heavy in your hand, rough with lichen that pricks your skin. You hold the branch at an angle beneath the dripping section of the ceiling and wedge smaller branches into a triangular frame. You pile moss and brush atop the structure, pressing each piece into place until water rolls off the makeshift awning in rivulets rather than dripping onto your bedding. You breathe deeply. Shelter is not merely a place to sleep. It is a fortress against dripping water and howling wind. You smile at your handiwork, knowing that by morning the moss will soak up moisture and collapse if you do not tend it. You add a fresh layer of brush, patting it firmly until the sound of earth settling echoes around you. Then you step back and inspect your work. Water splashes harmlessly onto the ground beneath the shelter, leaving the sleeping area bone dry. Now that the wind tosses the cave with violent gusts, you move to weave a brush hut in a sheltered alcove just inside the entrance. This hut will keep wind from swirling dust and dampness into your living space. You gather lengths of slender willow and bend them into arches. Each arch you plant firmly in the earth so that the tips meet at the top, forming a ribcage of green wood. You weave thinner branches horizontally through each arch, weaving them over and under like the ribs of a great beast. The wind whistles through the open ends, but as you layer fresh boughs of spruce and pine along the ribs, the whispers fall silent. The thick wreath of needles yields a thatch that repels water and stifles wind. You step inside for a moment and feel the air grow still. The wind's roar outside seems a memory. You pat the woven walls, checking for loose sections that could tear in a storm. Each pull of a needle or fir twig tugs the structure closer to permanence. You tie each intersection with thin strips of hide, soaked in water to make them pliable. As the strips dry, they shrink and tighten, binding the brush hut into a snug shell. Within the hut, you spread fresh animal furs across the ground. These furs fit together like puzzle pieces, weighted down with stones at the edges so they do not slide. You cluster furs by layering them, thick deer hide beneath soft rabbit pelts, and then a final wreath of fox fur on top. Each layer traps air, creating insulation that rises like a living thing. You pat each surface, feeling the softness that will cradle your body once darkness returns. Before you settle into the furs, you tend the hearth. The logs from earlier now rest in fading embers. You press a fresh kindling bundle atop the coals and hold the dry bark against the core. Tiny sparks catch. A sudden flicker of flame ignites the bark. You blow gently, and the flame grows, licking at each corner of the new wood. The sound of crackling logs returns like a heartbeat. Soon the hearth glares with warmth, and the cave feels alive. You turn back to the furs and draw them close around your ankles. The air here inside the brush hut feels safe and still. You lean your back against the woven wall, hearing every creak of wood and every sigh of wind that tries to enter. You press your palm to the wall and feel the chill leach away. The shelter stands firm, and you know that as long as the furs line the ground, your body will remain snug against the stone below. Now you gather stones from the hearth and carry them inside the hut one by one. You nestle each heated stone in a shallow pit at your feet. The stones hiss as they press against damp earth, and steam rises in vapors that spiral into the woven roof. The air fills with the scent of wet stone and conifer sap. You lay one stone beneath your head like a pillow. Its warmth seeps into your neck. You let the heat press through your chest, chasing away any last thread of morning chill. You retrieve a clay bowl of cold water from the cave's pool. Leaning forward, you take a sip, cool and pure. You let water drip into the bowl and watch each droplet patter upon the warm stones, humming its own quiet song. Soon steam rises in a gentle mist that swirls around you. You breathe slowly, the moisture finding every pore, and feel your skin awaken. A rustle from outside the brush hut reminds you to remain alert. In wind-blown caves, predators slip through darkness as though it is their own skin. You reach for the bone awl beside your furs and hold it ready, its point shining like moonlight on river water. You place your ear to the ground to catch any sound. The click of hooves, the scuttle of paws. The wind hides everything. You concentrate on your breathing, slow and even. The cave's entrance shudders as a gust rips past the woven wall. You feel the shelter breathe with each gust, bending but not breaking. Minutes pass. The embers at your feet glow brighter as they draw heat from the hearth. The cave's air grows thick with warmth and mist. Outside, the wind wails like a wounded animal. Inside, you feel at peace. Fire and shelter conspire to hold back the storm. You reach beneath your cloak and pull out a handful of dried roots. You place them into a small bundle and unwrap strands until you can tie them into a knot. This bundle will burn slowly through the night, releasing a faint aroma that masks your scent from creatures that prowl. You position it near the hearth so it will catch flame when the fire burns low. While wind-torn echoes shake the cave walls, you prepare a bed of small twigs atop the firs. You arrange each so that no moisture will seep upward from the stone floor. You line the edges with leaves you gathered before dawn. These leaves form a barrier that traps any final cold spots beneath. You step back to inspect your work. The bed looks like a nest of dry comfort, ready to cradle you once you lie down. You carry a shard of flint and a small bowl of oil extracted from yesterday's fat. You pour a few drops onto a twisted strand of cloth to form a makeshift torch. You ignite it against a glowing ember. The torch flares, and you feel the heat ride up your arm. You hang it on a hook carved into the cave wall, so that light spills across the woven shelter. Shadows leap and dance on each framing branch. The brush hut's interior glows alive. With torchlight flickering, you climb into your nest of furs, drawing each layer around your shoulders like a steeping cloak. You lean your head against a heated stone pillow. The heat radiates into the back of your skull until your eyelids droop from comfort. You feel the soft nudge of warm air rise around your ankles. The cave's distant, jagged walls fade into darkness. You shift on the furs until your head rests in the perfect cradle. Each breath you take warms your chest as though the fire flows through you. The wind outside rips at the cave, but you feel nestled in a living womb of wood and fur. You think of ancestors who slept in similar huts, recalling how they trusted the heartbeat of a hearth to banish darkness. You feel that heartbeat now, a solid thrum beneath your feet, pulsing through heated stones and flaring embers. Your eyelids grow heavy. You recall the day's labors, coaxing flames from dying embers, weaving boughs into shelter, and bedding down on furs that yield warmth like a mother's embrace. Each act carried you toward this moment of rest. You let your breathing slow until it matches the rhythm of embers glowing to ash. You know dawn will come again, fiery and demanding. Tomorrow's chores will call for fresh wood, new shelter, and a rekindled hearth. But for now, you close your eyes and drift into sleep. The brush hut stands firm around you. The cave's walls protect you. Fire and shelter will hold the night at bay. And in the hush between gust and ember crackle, you surrender to the comfort of warmth forged by your own hands. The fire's glow dims to a steady warmth as evening settles over the clearing. The wind that rattled against woven walls during the day has quieted to a soft whisper that slips beneath branches. You awaken from a short nap by the hearth's embers, aware of the faint dripping of condensation from the cave ceiling. The moss that covers your shelter's roof feels damp beneath your fingertips, yet remains firm, having drained rainwater during storms. You reach beneath your cloak and pull out a handful of dried roots. You place them into a small bundle and unwrap strands until you can tie them into a knot. This bundle will burn slowly through the night, releasing a faint aroma that masks your scent from creatures that prowl. You position it near the hearth, so it will catch flame when the fire burns low. While wind-torn echoes shake the cave walls, You prepare a bed of small twigs atop the firs. You arrange each so that no moisture will seep upward from the stone floor. You line the edges with leaves you gathered before dawn. These leaves form a barrier that traps any final cold spots beneath. You step back to inspect your work. The bed looks like a nest of dry comfort, ready to cradle you once you lie down. You carry a shard of flint and a small bowl of oil extracted from yesterday's fat. You pour a few drops onto a twisted strand of cloth to form a makeshift torch. You ignite it against a glowing ember. The torch flares, and you feel the heat ride up your arm. You hang it on a hook, carved into the cave wall so that light spills across the woven shelter. Shadows leap and dance on each framing branch. The brush hut's interior glows alive. With torchlight flickering, you climb into your nest of furs, drawing each layer around your shoulders like a steeping cloak. You lean your head against a heated stone pillow. The heat radiates into the back of your skull until your eyelids droop from comfort. You feel the soft nudge of warm air rise around your ankles. The cave's distant jagged walls fade into darkness. You shift on the furs until your head rests in the perfect cradle. Each breath you take warms your chest, as though the fire flows through you. The wind outside rips at the cave, but you feel nestled in a living womb of wood and fur. You think of ancestors who slept in similar huts, recalling how they trusted the heartbeat of a hearth to banish darkness. You feel that heartbeat now, a solid thrum beneath your feet, pulsing through heated stones and flaring embers. Your eyelids grow heavy. You recall the day's labors, coaxing flames from dying embers, weaving boughs into shelter, and bedding down on furs that yield warmth like a mother's embrace. Each act carried you toward this moment of rest. You let your breathing slow until it matches the rhythm of embers glowing to ash. You know dawn will come again, fiery and demanding. Tomorrow's chores will call for fresh wood, new shelter, and a rekindled hearth. But for now you close your eyes and drift into sleep. The brush hut stands firm around you. The cave's walls protect you. Fire and shelter will hold the night at bay, and in the hush between gust and ember crackle, you surrender to the comfort of warmth forged by your own hands. The fire's glow dims to a steady warmth as evening settles over the clearing. The wind that rattled against woven walls during the day has quieted to a soft whisper that slips beneath branches. You awaken from a short nap by the hearth's embers, aware of the faint dripping of condensation from the cave ceiling. The moss that covers your shelter's roof feels damp beneath your fingertips, yet remains firm, having drained rainwater during storms. You slide from your fur bedding and stretch every muscle before gathering loose kindling from beneath the hearth. The embers glow dim red. You ruffle a handful of dried birch bark onto the coals. A ripple of flame brightens the cavern, chasing away the shadows that lurk near the far wall. You shake out your fire-making kit and draw a piece of flint from your belt. With a sharp strike of your hammerstone, you spark a new flame. The fresh blaze leaps to life, illuminating every contour of the woven hut. You leave the fire to settle into a gentle roar and approach your sleeping area. The furs beneath you are arranged in layers: deer hide for a sturdy base, rabbit pelts for softness, and fox fur for an outer warmth. Yet during cold nights you have felt a chill rising from the damp stone below. Now you decide to reinforce the bedding. You reach into a leather pouch and pull out thick strips of moss you collected near dawn. You spread the moss over the lowest layer of furs, creating an extra cushion that will trap air and block moisture. With this new insulation in place, you test each layer by pressing down with your palm. The furs sink slightly into the moss, then spring back, cushioned by trapped air. You lie back, pressing your body into the warm nest. The contrast between cool stone and heated layers feels like a soft embrace. You raise your head to inspect the woven walls. Each branch still holds firm under the cave's sighing wind. The rope bindings you soaked in water and then pulled tight have shrunk into taut clasps that secure every twig. Satisfied that the shelter remains sturdy, You rise and fetch a handful of fresh brush boughs to further reinforce the hut's exterior. You press each new branch into gaps along the lower edges, where wind could seep in. The added layer of needles and twigs helps fill small holes and builds a dense barrier that will keep cold drafts at bay. As you tuck each fresh bough, pine resin from their tips fills the air with a warm, earthy scent. Now you turn your attention to the cave's ceiling above the sleeping area. Last night's awning kept water from dripping directly onto the furs, but some moisture still trickled past the edges. You gather a bundle of leafy ferns and layer them atop wet moss. These ferns create a secondary barrier, their large fronds catching stray droplets and directing them along curved edges, so they fall harmlessly to the floor beside the hearth rather than on your bed. You pat each frond until it lies flush with the moss. As the firelight plays over the layered shelter, you can see how each piece works together to form a roof that sheds water and resists wind. With the shelter secure, you circle the hearth to reinforce tools that will assist sleep. Your bone awl rests on a cleft of wood beside the fire. You remove it and test the point against a scrap of hide. It glides through with ease. You smear a bit of pine pitch along its handle to seal grain pores, preventing moisture from softening the bone during cold nights. Then you set it carefully atop a flat stone to avoid dulling the point. Next, you reach for a small clay pot filled with bitter herbal tea made from crushed roots. You pour a bit more into your wooden spoon and taste. The heat spreads through your chest, chasing off lingering chill. You pass the spoon to a companion, asleep in a nearby hollow. He wakes, rubs his eyes, and takes a sip. The herbal infusion seems to revitalize his spirit, brightening a weariness left by yesterday's hunt. He nods, expression easing into gratitude, then lies back down on his own furs. You gaze at the embers, finger in hand, and feel a gentle heat that pulses through your palm. Each ember stores memory of every fire you coaxed to life. You recall dawn's rite of summoning flame, the rush of victory as tinder ignited, and the taste of warmth when it first kissed your hands. You settle one heated stone beneath your feet. The heat bleeds through the fur layers, searing cold from your toes. You shift until the stone fits snugly against your sole, then rub your foot to spread warmth. Outside, distant echo of dripping watermarks, shifting weather. You watch as shadows shift along woven walls, deepening as night grows darker. You press your palm flat against the fence of sticks at the cave's edge and listen to wind caressing branches above. Your shelter creaks, but does not falter. The walls hold firm under every gust that attempts to enter. Within these walls you feel anchored, as though the cave itself cradles you in its rocky arms. You rise and take a flake from your belt. You move to a section of hide piled near the hearth and press the flint's edge between stitches. In moments you sever a strip of hide to use for binding and repair. You follow a seam where two hides meet, piercing the leather to form evenly spaced holes. You thread the strip through each hole, pulling tight to seal a small tear caused by last night's movement. The new binding lies firm and flush against the hide, and you wipe the edge of your knife to clear any scuffs. Satisfied that gear remains strong, you circle the hearth once more. You scoop a handful of ash from the pit's edge and scatter it around the sleeping area. The ash will repel insects and serve as a barrier against creeping damp. Fine grey powder settles around furs and under woven walls, effectively soaking up stray moisture. Your next task is to reinforce the cave's entrance with additional obstacles to hinder wind and small predators. You gather logs and stones from just outside. You stack them to form a low barrier that forces wind to funnel around rather than directly into the shelter. Each log you place interlocks with the next, like the vertebrae of a large creature coiled across the ground. Small stones you wedge at the base fill gaps so that no small animal can slip through. Soon the entrance looks less like an opening and more like a doorway whose lips have been sealed by careful hands. You step back and test the wind's force by dropping a handful of fallen leaves in front of the barrier. They swirl, but do not cross the barrier line. You smile, pleased that your additions succeed. Returning inside, you rake fresh embers together and add a small bundle of thorny branches to the blaze. Sparks lift and dance, and soon the fire flares to life once more. You catch a whiff of resin as the flames lick each branch, sending a smoky warmth curling upward. The cave's walls glow and cast moving silhouettes across woven panels. You feel content as the fire's hum settles into a lull, though its light remains vigilant. You gather more ferns and pile them in a cluster beside the hearth. Tomorrow, you will unearth roots that grow in moss beds beneath damp soil. The ferns will serve as a mat to kneel on as you dig, and will provide leafy bundles to wrap harvested roots for transport. You pat the ferns into a neat pile so they do not scatter. Your final task before rest is to inspect the sleeping area for stray debris. You kneel on the furs and sweep away small pebbles or shards of stick that could jab or pinch through blankets. Each piece you pluck feels like a minor victory. You smooth the fur until it looks and feels like a cradle for your body. You rise and stand quietly, listening as the wind hums beyond the cave mouth. You draw one last breath, filling your lungs with fire-warmed air. You feel the pit of warmth beneath the hearth radiate through your feet and climb up your legs. You sense the woven walls and thatch pressing around you, a shelter forged from wood and earth. You settle onto the furs, drawing each layer across your shoulders. The moss beneath cradles you, insulating your body from the cool stones. The flames glimmer in a circle, watching you like gentle guardians. You close your eyes. Each breath slows until it merges with the fire's pulse beside you. In this moment, you understand that mastery over fire and shelter goes beyond simply building a refuge. It is an ongoing dialogue with the cave itself, a negotiation of warmth and dryness against wind and rain. It is the knowledge of where to place each flake of flint, how to bind each stick with sinew, and when to feed the fire to keep wolves at bay. Night deepens, and the cave's wind tumbles against your woven walls. Yet you feel safe, alight with the glow of fire and cradled by each layer of crafted protection. You drift into sleep under a canopy quilted with misty air and embers glow, at peace in the balance you have forged between flame and stone. You wake before dawn to the gentle murmur of voices drifting through the cave. The fire near the hearth still glows in the dim light, casting flickering shadows across the rough walls. You pull yourself upright on a bed of furs and step lightly toward the communal fire, careful not to disturb elders, nestled in blankets near its glow. The air carries the scent of damp earth and clay, smoked dry last night. You descend the slight incline that leads to the hearth and find your place among others who rise early to share tasks before sunrise fully breaks. A grey-haired woman tends to a small hearth beside a cluster of stones. She cradles an infant, swaddled in soft rabbit fur against her breast. The child's tiny fingers curl around a strand of her hair. Quiet lullabies rise from her lips, a melody that reaches into the dark corners of the cave and soothes everyone who hears it. Nearby, a young girl crouches by a shallow fire pit, her eyes intent as she stirs a bubbling broth of boiled roots and wild herbs. She is methodical, adding a handful of bitter greens, while another woman, no older than 16, gathers a bundle of freshly foraged greens to toss on top. You draw closer and see how care for the youngest members of the tribe belongs to everyone. No single mother claims ownership of the child by the grey-haired woman. Instead, kin and neighbor alike gather in a silent circle to share responsibility for children's safety and nourishment. The grey-haired woman passes the infant to an older man who cups the child in his arms. They smile at one another, lines of age, creased with hard-earned joy. The man's weathered hands rest on the child's soft back, as if promising that youth always carries the wisdom of age. You scoop a small portion of the bubbling broth into a hollowed wooden bowl. You blend in crushed roots that soften the bitter tang. You stir slowly with a carved bone spoon as the aroma of steaming greens rises. A child toddles near, bare feet patting the dirt floor, eyes bright with curiosity. You bend to bring the bowl to her lips. She drinks eagerly, savoring each drop. An elder beside you nods. He says that nourishing the children feeds the future of every clan. You smile and step back, letting the children claim the space around the hearth like a living tapestry of today and tomorrow. Once the broth finishes bubbling, a young mother scoops a chunk onto a flat stone and places it on the fire to roast. The crackle of wood and fat mingles with soft laughter as children chase one another around the perimeter. One boy trips and falls, skinning his knee on a jagged stone. He wails, and everyone immediately shifts attention toward him. An elder kneels at his side, pulling a handful of clean moss from a pouch. She places it on the wound to staunch bleeding, then wraps a strip of cloth around the boy's leg. He stops crying, transfixed by the gentle touch. His tears turn to curiosity as the elder shows him how to press the moss until it seals the cut. You catch his gaze as he watches wisdom pass from one generation to the next. With the boy comforted, you step back to a woven rack where hides hang to dry. You see the mark of last week's hunt still visible, where flint scraped flesh from bone. A girl no older than 12 draws near and watches your hands as you inspect the hides for holes. She nods as you point out a small tear that needs mending. You hand her a bone awl threaded with rawhide sinew. She presses it through leather, pulling each stitch tight and marking the seam with care. As she works, you offer tips: how to line the edges for a tighter bond, how to smooth the hide to prevent water from seeping beneath. She listens with seriousness, soaking up each word. Around the hearth, you see that every learner finds a teacher. A young man instructs another in flint knapping, showing him how to angle the hammerstone to remove the thorn of each flake. A woman shapes a necklace of carved bone beads and passes her technique to a child eager to string each piece in a steady rhythm. Ears listen, eyes follow, and hands mimic. The cave holds the hum of shared knowledge, each lesson a stitch in the fabric of life that binds one to another. You move toward a cluster of elders seated on flat stones. One holds a pair of worn moccasins fashioned from deer leather. He threads sinew through eyelets and shows a boy how to wrap fur-insulated hide around his foot. The boy's smile gleams in the firelight as he wiggles his toes and feels warmth seep into the hide. You recall how cold nights once stole sleep from your youth. Now you see that the craft of moccasin making ensures that no child walks barefoot across icy river stones. You offer to help carve new wooden soles for winter snow, and an elder nods in approval, trusting you to keep tradition alive. In a corner of the cave, a trio gathers around a low pit filled with burning coals. They roast slabs of gathered meat on sharpened sticks. The aroma drifts through the cave, mingling with wisps of smoke from the hearth. Each branch they use as skewers shows whittled notches, proof of nights spent carving handles to keep hands safe from heat. Around the roasting pit, children gather to watch meat sizzle and pop. As soon as the first strips become golden, a pair of older siblings volunteer to slice them into smaller pieces and distribute them. The children taste the savory chunks and break into giggles that echo like chimes through the cave. As the sun rises higher outside, its light filters through fissures in the cave roof. You step toward a rocky outcrop where birds nest, and you pluck downy feathers to use in calling small game. You hold up each feather and instruct a young hunter on how to tie it to a thin shaft. Together, you prepare a fletching for a newly carved arrow. He veins with excitement as he grips the shaft. You remind him that feathers guide flight and that patience matters more than speed when hunting. He nods and holds the arrow as though it is a living thing, ready to carry him through coming hunts. Beyond the hearth, elders convene to discuss the day's distribution of tasks. A grey-haired woman gathers leaders of each age group to assign duties. Some will tend fields near the riverbank. Others will repair thatch on outlying huts. and still others will gather fresh water from a distant spring. You volunteer to oversee children who will help carry water and gather tinder for fire. An elder nods, giving you trust to shepherd youth. You call a group of eager youngsters. You teach them to balance wooden buckets on their shoulders and to fill them gently so water does not splash and waste. You remind them to refill adult vessels before drinking. They listen diligently, stepping off with buckets as though carrying a precious jewel. As midday approaches, you notice how each face around the fire bears signs of labor but also of genuine joy. The bonds of kinship seem to flow like lifeblood among you. When an elder clears her throat to tell a story, children drop their tasks and gather close. She begins in a low voice, recounting how ancestors first found refuge in these caves after long journeys across barren plains. She tells of how they forged ties with neighboring clans to endure drought and hunger. You hear the past come to life through her words, a living legacy that you share with all who will follow. Amid the rising heat of midday, you descend into a younger ring of those who have learned to stitch furs and carve tools. You kneel beside a boy who holds a slab of bog iron that he plans to shape into a knife blade. You guide his hand as he strikes a preliminary chip from the raw metal. Sparks fly and the boy flinches. You remind him to steady his grip and to aim each strike with care. Under your gaze, he finds strength and focus. He chips another flake, then another, until the iron takes shape. You feel pride in his determined face as the blade grows. A woman approaches with a bundle of freshly woven grass mats. She is teaching a sister from a distant band how to weave basket bases for storing grain and roots. They sit side by side and demonstrate each step, how to pinch strands and to cross them at precise angles. As they weave, they converse in low tones, trading jokes about how easy it is to weave a basket once you know where to begin. The younger woman's hands tremble at first, but laughter springs from both as the basket takes form. Soon it holds enough small roots to feed a family through the coming dusk. You stand and pour fresh water into bowls from a clay jug. Each person drinks gratefully, washing sweat from faces blackened by soot. Together you gather around a makeshift table, a plank of wood laid across a rock. Elders and children alike sit shoulder to shoulder as food is passed. You tear at strips of roasted meat and hand them to the youngest. You watch as children bite hunks of warmth. They close their eyes in delight, cheeks bulging with flavor. Beside them, elders sip tea prepared with crushed roots that ease aches and settle weary muscles. Your gaze sweeps across the communal circle. Hands overlap as food is exchanged. Each spoonful, each morsel passed, reinforces the ties that bind you. You see young lovers whisper instructions to one another as they lift heavy baskets to the table. You see siblings sharing the last piece of root cake, splitting it unevenly to satisfy hunger. You see neighbors bowing heads to catch crumbs that fall, ensuring nothing goes to waste. When the meal ends, elders rise and call for work to resume. Some will repair thatched huts near the cave entrance, reweaving straw to keep wind from tearing roof layers. Others will haul dry stones from the riverside for building walls to protect fields from flood. You summon the children who will help fill clay vessels with fresh water. Each child carries a small pot, arms straining at its weight. They hoist the pots with roped straps, marching in single file toward the spring. Their faces brighten at the thought of their contribution. You gather those who will tend the sick and elderly. 2 women volunteer to carry left-behind rush bundles to layer on burial sites. They step forward with steady resolve, understanding that care for the dead is a final act of respect and sustains the spirit of the clan. After assignments are clear, elders bless each group. They place a hand on each shoulder and murmur prayers for steady hands and safe passage. The beat of their words creates a sense of continuity between past and future, reminding all that communal life is a tapestry woven from every thread of human endeavor. As you supervise children by the spring, you recall how elders once taught you to cup water, as if holding life itself. You pass this lesson to each child: how to place both palms beneath the stream so that water flows smooth without splashing waste. You watch a young boy tilt his head back and let the clear water fill his mouth. He sighs as liquid cools his throat. You smile, knowing this simple act reaffirms his place in the clan's legacy. By midday's heat, each task proceeds in harmony. Elders remain close by to advise. Children shriek with playful urgency, and adults carve a promise of skill into each piece of bark, wood, and clay. You sense the pulse of shared life thrumming beneath every act. In this refuge, no one stands alone. Each burden is shared, each joy amplified. As the sun drifts toward the cave mouth, you gather near the hearth once more. Elders tell of distant seasons when great floods threatened the plains. They speak of how ancestors worked together to raise embankments using woven mats of brush and wattle. Their words linger in the air, reminding you that cooperation is the bulwark against disaster. You lean against a carved pillar of stone and feel the warmth of the hearth pulse through your bones. You place a hand on a young hunter's shoulder and remind him that each bond forged today will carry him through tomorrow's trials. He nods, understanding that his strength comes not only from muscles trained in the hunt, but from the unity of the clan. You rise as the elders call for evening feasts. The tasks of cleaning hide and sharpening tools are set aside for shared laughter and conversation. You plant a cluster of stones in the center, building a new fire where warmth and storytelling will gather. And as dusk paints the cave walls with blue and grey, you know that nothing stands stronger than a people bound by kinship. This is where you belong, at the hearth's edge, shoulder to shoulder with elders who guide your steps and children who follow in your shadow. Communal life and kinship bonds are not just tradition. They are the fire and shelter that keep the world alive. Heart to flamed hearth, generation to generation. Night covers the land as a thick blanket, and the cave's entrance yawns into shadow. You take your post beside the hearth, spear held upright, senses sharp to every movement. Wolves prowl beyond tree lines, their eyes bright in torchlight. Large cats lurk where branches crowd together, their deep growls rolling on the wind. You scan the darkness, each flicker of movement raising your heartbeat. Flames crackle beside you, but embers cool quickly, and you must remain vigilant until dawn. A twig snaps ahead. You freeze, muscles coiled, listening for response. Silence answers. A lone wolf crests a ridge, pausing beneath flickering torchlight. You raise the spear slowly, keeping your body steady. The wolf ducks back behind a thicket, disappearing into the night. You exhale in relief, but do not shift your stance. Through the long hours, clan members trade posts beside the fire, each watch passing knowledge of tracks and calls in hushed tones. When last embers fade to faint glow, you step back to shared beds of fur, trusting the warmth of both fire and fellowship to guard the tribe until first light returns. Winter releases its grip at last as thaw seeps into meadows and meltwater courses down cliffs. You rise before dawn, gathering hunters to follow migrating herds across still frozen plains. Elk and bison trek ancient pathways toward open valleys. You press on through crusted snow, reading hoofprints in morning light. Each step brings new signs of melt beneath pine-limbed pines. You dig at ice-sealed streams until cold water trickles into your hands. Each sip reveals minerals carried from mountain springs. You mark hidden pools where moss clings to wet rocks. In midday sun, herds appear on distant ridges. You track their passage, gathering guides to fresh grazing at lower elevations. Your group scouts new springs concealed beneath debris, keeping watch for predators drawn by thaw. When you return to camp, sleds load with dried meat and layered furs. Families follow behind, migrating across plains that once lay blanketed in snow. Night finds you huddled beneath a sky lit by faint stars, warmed by a fire built of driftwood and pine pitch. Though frozen wastes lie behind, Hope moves forward through shared footsteps and mapped paths to softer ground. The day's hunts bring victory and injury alike. A hunter's leg shivers from deep cut near knee. You kneel by a shallow spring, cupping cool water to rinse blood away. Grasping crushed plantain leaves, you form a paste that cools heat and staunches flow. You press the poultice into the wound, feeling its moisture draw out pain. Nearby, a child's fever drives them to shiver in furs. You gather elderflower blossoms and steep them in boiled water. Each drop of tea soothes fevered flesh and brings slow relief. From clay deposits along riverbanks, you dig a handful of smooth earth. Mixing it with water, you spread paste over a hunter's infected shoulder, watching toxins draw out. Once cooled, you cover the clay-cured tissue with softened animal fat and fresh sinew strips. You guide a younger healer as they learn to roll coneflower root into bandages to ease cough and ease breathing. Long into dusk, you and other healers apply bitter birch bark tea to cuts and crush yarrow blooms for poultices that ease swelling. Firelight dances over each bandaged arm and chilled brow as the tribe's bodies mend beneath shared care. Evening gatherings center on the cave's rear wall, a canvas for memory and vision. Elders crush red ochre stones into powder, mixing pigment with animal fat and water. A storyteller steps forward, bone brush raised. She traces the first shape, a running deer that leaps from shadow into living light. Children watch wide-eyed as her hand glides across rock, each line a pulse of shared history. As the painted deer emerges, she begins a tale of the great hunt, how ancestors tracked herds across frozen plains, guided by stars whispering secrets. Flames flicker below, casting dancing light on painted scenes of hunters and prey. When the artwork stands complete, a chorus of voices rises in chant. A low beat of simple drum joins the song, echoing through every corner. Each verse passes survival wisdom, where to find hidden springs, which herbs ease fever, how to read wind rhythms before storm. As chanting fades, one by one, figures step forward to leave handprints beside painted beasts, signing their place in an unbroken chain of memory. Under torchlight's glow, ancient wisdom passes from heart to heart, binding past and present in ritual that ensures every lesson endures beyond final breath. When rains fail and springs dry to cracked clay, the tribe gathers to decide how to endure. Fields crack and stored roots dwindle. You propose dividing all foraged grains into daily rations. Elders call for scouts to search distant valleys for water hidden beneath rock formations. Hunters and gatherers form work groups. One digs deeper wells at the river's bed. Another seals clay, lined pits to preserve herbs. Messengers ride to neighboring clans, offering dried meat for clay pots that hold sacred water. When a rival band approaches seeking the last spring, you meet with their leader under vaulted skies to negotiate shared access rather than risk battle. Agreements form around the fire, 2 nights of water, sharing before dawn, then clear pine forests for wind barriers. You appoint watchers to patrol wells and watch for flash floods that could wash away scarce stores. Each clan member contributes. Women craft food pouches from sown grasses. Children haul dustless grain at dawn. Despite hunger's strain, unity shapes each strike of hoe and each pitched mound of earth. When drought finally softens under first rains, you emerge from shared hardship with bonds woven deeper than stone. Imagine waking before dawn, senses pricked by wind that scours every bone. No roof seals out cold. Water lies frozen beneath inches of ice that fracture under your bare feet. You strike flint, sparks sputter and fade. Stillness returns, bringing wolves closer. If you find no way to coax flame, darkness and predator claim you before sunrise. Every sip of water demands knowledge of hidden springs or risk of toxic pool filtered by moss. One slip on steep ice means snapped rib, or worse, with no healer's hands near. Fever strikes fast, herbs lie unknown, and your body shivers beneath thin furs. You cannot trace a deer's track until dawn heralds frost's goodbye. Guided by stars that wheel overhead, you must follow hoofprints beneath half-frozen snow or starve. One misstep in carving tools means blade dulls against bone, and your hand fails to cut meat before frost burns tissue. A single error in forging shelter means water drips through moss and dims embers. Without clan's trust, you stand alone against tooth and claw. Each breath demands skill. Each heartbeat drums resilience. In that ancient world, community was lifeblood, and only the bond of many held back the wild's hunger at each rising sun.